for coming out tonight for Humanities Montana, our current state dialogues community conversation on immigration and the travel ban. If you would not like to participate in the community conversation tonight, we just ask that you either move to the patio or that side room is open as well. The servers will be going out there, so you're all set there. And if you'd like a beer at any point during the evening, just shoot up your hand, the server will come to you, and yeah, we'll get you all set. So my name is Brooke. I'm a program assistant for Humanities Montana. We're really excited to start up our community conversation series again here at Imagination Brewing. Our current state dialogues is a conversation series that challenges Montanans to think about identity, race, religion, and community. So thank you all for coming and participating and engaging in your community. Humanities Montana is an independent nonprofit affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. We provide grants and programs on history, literature, Native American cultures, and more all over the state. So we serve the whole state. Our headquarters is Missoula. Our mission is to enrich the lives of all Montanans by fostering inquiry and stimulating civil, informed conversations about the human experience. Hence what we're doing tonight. A few quick thank yous before we get started. Thank you to MCAT. This presentation is being recorded by Missoula Community Access Television as part of a media assistance grant donated to us by MCAT. I wanted to thank Jen Barilli at IRC for her help and for promoting this event, as well as Mary for helping promote at Soft Landing. And of course, Fernanda and Robert, owners of Imagination Brewing, for creating this space for events like this. We're really grateful to have an organization and a brewery in Missoula, like Imagination. So, community conversations, how many people have attended a community conversation before on any topic? A few people. Okay, cool, so a lot of newbies, that's very exciting. We, at Humanities Montana, we like to do events like this because we believe that engaging in your community is very important. There are many ways to do this, but this is one way that we do it. It helps us to understand people's aspirations for the community, people's concerns, and how people think and talk about issues like immigration and the travel ban. It's easy to talk about it with our friends and family. To talk about it in a public space is a completely different thing. And I also want to mention that this is an inclusive space. We like to practice civility while talking about these issues. There is going to be, the second half of the program is going to be allotted for audience questions, thoughts, participation. The first half is going to be kind of a question and answer session with our panel. So I'm going to introduce our panel. On my left, I have Shahid Haq. He is one of our current state dialogue speakers. So he travels around the state and does programs in schools, libraries, wherever he is needed. Shahid is an immigration lawyer, founder and president of the Montana Immigrant Justice Alliance, and a law instructor at U of M here. He dedicates his practice to helping immigrants obtain legal status in the United States and pursue all that the country has to offer. He represents well over 1,000 immigrants and their families all across Montana, and has been in contact with over 1,000 other immigrants in Montana through his advocacy efforts. He has internalized their stories, understands their feelings and anxieties, and is one of the few people in Montana who has a broad and clear picture of the diverse immigrant communities throughout Montana, from Glacier to Yellowstone, and in all the small communities along the way. So thanks for coming, Shahid. We also have, in the middle, we have Mushtaq. Mushtaq is an interpreter and translator for the IRC here in Missoula. He attended the University of Montana under a Fulbright exchange program to earn his MA in linguistics, and is a resettled refugee from Iraq. So thank you, Mushtaq, for being here. And on the far end there, we have Danny Tenenbaum. Danny is a Missoula attorney and a former refugee officer with the Department of Homeland Security. In that capacity, he traveled abroad from 2009 to 2013 to interview and vet refugees who applied for resettlement in the United States. In 2011, he received the USCIS Director's Award for Service in Iraq. Since leaving government service, he has guest lectured at Yale Law School and Columbia University School of Public Health, and continues to lead trainings for advocates and attorneys representing refugees who are appealing denials of resettlement. He now volunteers with the International Rescue Committee, helping newly arrived refugee families acclimate to life in Missoula. So let's give a hand for our panel. All right, so like I said, this is an interactive evening. I'm just gonna ask some questions, some general questions to the panel, but really it's about talking amongst ourselves about these issues. We're really lucky to have these experts here with us this evening, and I encourage you to ask questions that maybe you're afraid to ask, or maybe that are uncomfortable, and hopefully, we have some answers for you. So tonight we're going to talk about immigration and the travel ban. Executive Order, the technical, Executive Order 13769, protecting the nation from foreign terrorist entry into the United States, also known as the Muslim ban or travel ban, was an executive order issued by the U.S. President Donald Trump. And as many of you know, new restrictions went into effect yesterday. And as a result of a lengthy process, a few things have changed. So this policy targets Iran, Libya, Syria, Yemen, Somalia, Chad, and North Korea, as well as some Venezuelan officials. I'm going to open it up. Unless you want to go ahead. Yeah.
I'm so glad you said all those countries, because all night I've been worried about being able to recite those 7. So now it's out of the way, you said it.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's out there. So I'm just going to open it up to anybody who'd like to hop in. Let's start to talk about the implications of this executive order, both the initial and revised, and how, there's been a lot of protests, there's been a lot of people in favor, some people are trying the middle ground, but what have been the general implications for our country and Montana, if you want to talk about that for the travel ban?
Okay, so it might be good to just start at the beginning, just like a quick summary. So in January, the very first travel ban went into effect. Is this one? And so the very first travel ban that went into effect targeted 7 countries, and it was very open-ended in terms of whether it applied to people who are green card holders or people who had various forms of non-immigrant visas, like temporary visas, student visas. And so when that executive order went into effect, it caused a lot of chaos, and there were shutdowns at airports, there was mass confusion, and there were a lot of protests, and the outcry in response to that executive order was pretty overwhelming. And that first executive order was challenged, and ultimately, before any decision could be made on that, the second executive order was issued that revised it. And so the second executive order restricted immigration from different countries. One country was dropped off, Iraq, but Iran, Yemen, Syria, Chad, and Somalia, I believe, all remained on there. And there were other minor differences between the two, but in substance, what happened was they adapted the law to become more able to withstand scrutiny in the courts, and so they revised it. And the second one was also there was also a temporary restraining order issued by a federal district court, and ultimately the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals found that there were serious constitutional problems with the executive order and upheld the temporary restraining order. And now the most recent executive order comes out that again changes things, and in many very confusing ways for everybody, including immigration attorneys. But was there somebody? Okay, so. the way the executive order stands now, the important implications are basically that in addition to the countries that were predominantly Muslim countries like Iran, Libya, Yemen, Somalia, and Chad, now they've included North Korea and Venezuela as well. And they've also made it way more confusing in terms of which categories of immigrants or people who are coming in as green card holders, people who are coming in as visitors or students, which ones of those are allowed to come in and which ones are not allowed to come in from each country. So it's the way it stands right now, people who, they are not issuing any more visas to people who want to come in as immigrants, meaning people who, for instance, are trying to get a green card because they're married to a US citizen spouse. They won't issue those anymore to people from those countries, which include several predominantly Muslim countries as well as North Korea and Venezuela. But they will issue student visas to people from a lot of those countries. And they will issue J1 exchange visas to people from a lot of those countries. And some of them they'll issue visitors visas to, and some of them they won't. But so what you're seeing here is that these countries were supposedly chosen to be to have these extra conditions and restrictions placed upon them because they're supposed to be countries that cannot adequately ensure that terrorists won't come to the United States. But at the same time, they're allowing students from those same countries. They're allowing visitors from some of those same countries. And so there are all kinds of issues with the executive order, and I don't want to go on too long before, you know.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Now that, and this happened a couple of days ago, a judge in Hawaii, and I think a judge in Maryland also issued a temporary restraining order, essentially temporarily blocking the implementation of this executive order. Are these restrictions in effect today?
Yes, yeah. The district court in Hawaii and also in Maryland issued TROs that are in effect right now, I believe.
Okay,
yeah.
so the restrictions in the executive order, the Muslim travel ban 3, are those in effect right now?
I believe they are in effect, but it's returned to I think what the U.S. Supreme Court said in their decision, which was that Executive Order 2 was they upheld the TRO, but except with regards to a certain category of people, and maybe it would be that. To be honest, it's so strange to me. I don't fully know which provisions are intact or not right now.
But building on your point that because this newest executive order blocks certain types of people who are attempting to immigrate to the United States, that means move here permanently, but it doesn't block people who are coming here for student visas. That was something that the judge in Hawaii specifically cited to point out that this is a little absurd, this executive order, because the Trump administration argued that this had to do with national security concerns. And if that's true, it doesn't really make sense why the executive order would treat students one way, or people applying for J visas in one way, and then people applying for permanent residency a different way. I mean, if your actual concern is the national security of the United States, you would think that it would just be a blanket. It would treat everyone equally, because if someone was intending to come to the United States to commit an act of terror, you would think that at this point they would just be like, oh, well, I guess I can just apply for a student visa instead of trying to come through the green card process, the permanent resident process.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair.
But I think that as citizens, we should be secure that the President, Trump, was slapped down by the courts originally and then chose to countries to add to his list that he knew would make it through the scrutiny of our country, which were North Korea, we're almost going to war with, and Argentina, where there's been a serious political disruption.
Yeah, he added, or Venezuela and North Korea were added to the latest executive order, almost certainly to sort of fight against this notion that the executive order is just targeting Muslims. However, North Koreans aren't allowed to leave North Korea. And the US, it does admit a small number of North Korean refugees every year. It's a very small number, but the executive order and the Venezuela, the addition of Venezuela to the third executive order only applies to Venezuelan government officials. So I think most people who pay attention to immigration issues, who pay attention to national security, recognize that the addition of these two countries to the executive order, it's sort of just gloss in order to cover up the fact that, just like the first and second executive order, this is about keeping Muslims out of the United States. And that's what the courts have found as well, that that's the actual intent of this executive order. There's this discriminatory animus, and that's really the key word, animus. And that's what's getting these executive orders struck down every time. I think it's worth pointing out that if these executive orders were put forth by our previous presidents, there's a pretty good chance that they wouldn't be struck down in courts. Shahid, you might disagree with me. I don't know if that's true, 100% true, but what's really problematic for the Trump administration is that Trump tweeted a lot, and his senior administration officials, said a lot of things that were essentially just made very clear that the purpose of these executive orders was to just simply keep Muslims out of the United States. And the Immigration and Naturalization Act and the U.S. Constitution sort of forbid any policy that's just backed by discriminatory animus, even if you say that it's for national security reasons. The president has a lot of power to keep people out of the United States, but one thing you can't do is announce that I'm doing this because I don't like Muslims, and that's exactly what Trump did.
Yeah, it's really interesting. He really did shoot himself in the foot with that. And if he hadn't made his intent so clear through tweets and clear statements on the news and everything else, then we might not have gotten here, because the legal issue was always under the Immigration and Nationality Act, you can't discriminate on the basis of national origin unless you can prove that it would be detrimental to the interests of the United States to admit people from that country. So the issue is whether it's truly detrimental to the interest of the United States or not. And when the plaintiffs would challenge these executive orders, the court decisions would cite to the fact that the Trump administration provided no evidence, not even evidence under seal or under, where only the court could take a look at it. And the courts were asking the government to provide evidence that people from these countries would be more detrimental to the interests of the United States than anyone else. And the government simply didn't provide it. And that's what the judges have said in those decisions, that they simply haven't shown that it would be detrimental to the interests of the United States to admit, to refuse admission to every single person from these countries, and so they just didn't meet their burden. And if it weren't for and the judges' decisions really do cite the tweets. They even put them in little footnotes, and they put it in legalese. So they're like, as noted on the Twitter page @RealDonaldTrump on November 6th, 2012, and then they recite whatever thing. And usually his tweets are with all caps and exclamation marks, and so those go in the footnotes. But yeah, and that is kind of what has fueled a lot of these good decisions. Good in my view.
Well, and I think one goal of having a forum like this is to address both sides of the issue. I think it's easy in Missoula to align with a certain attitude toward these topics, but the polarization obviously very much exists here as it does in the rest of the country. And I just want to read two quotes really quick that came out of BBC News yesterday. One was from White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders. She said, "These restrictions are vital to ensuring that foreign nations comply with the minimum security standards required for the integrity of our immigration system and the security of our nation." And David Heyman, who served as Homeland Security official in the Obama administration, said that relative to Trump's first two travel ban attempts, the latest order seems much more rigorous and with the greater review and interest in interagency policy, but that the most pressing threat remains homegrown extremists. And I was hoping we could talk a little bit about why that's being ignored.
Anything to say?
So I can talk about people's perspective. I mean, with regard to the travel ban that started in January, and especially, like, for example, when we talk about the travel ban in Iraq, Iraq used to be or was one on the list of the countries whose people were banned from entering the United States starting January 27th. Actually, there are a lot of people in Iraq who assisted the U.S. military by risking their lives and working for U.S. forces, providing U.S. forces with supplies so that the mission could be successful. And these people all of a sudden felt that they were abandoned by the United States government when the travel ban was issued. And it kind of fueled an anti-U.S. sentiment in Iraq and in the region in general. Some people were in the air, some people their visas were already issued, and when the travel ban went into effect, and they felt very frustrated, and some of them got actually detained at the airports. So it was kind of frustrating for a lot of people, and it hurt the U.S. standing in Iraq, actually, because if, like, people perceive that if the United States behaves like that with people or with its allies, so to speak, then the United States is not going to be able to make friends easily in the future, or, for example, allies easily in the future, whenever any problem like this happens. So people were hoping that the United States focus on, like, more details when trying to preserve or trying to protect the national security of the nation. Many countries in the Middle East, I'm not going to name them, have individuals that can be more dangerous on the U.S. national security. And even though those countries were not on the list, probably because they are wealthy countries, and as reported even, that the president had some business interests in them, so that the administration did not include them in the travel ban. They just focus on countries that are poor, or like the United States cannot benefit from in any way. And that's how people perceive the travel ban, especially when it was issued, or when it went into effect in January.
Do we want to, I kind of want to address the way that, and I don't want to get too much into the whole fake news thing, but how the media is kind of spinning these issues. What is, in terms of all the perspectives that exist out there about the travel ban, what are the current perspectives from your engagement with refugees and your experience as a resettled refugee that you are hearing here in Missoula and in Montana?
Sorry, was that question for whomever? Well, so the travel ban's been obviously in the media a lot, and I think everything that the Trump administration is doing, you have to, there's obviously a strong media strategy that goes along with that. That's just kind of how he operates. And so with the travel ban, it's no different. And it's strange how that's been mixed up with the legal issues so much, because they cite to things that he said on Meet the Press and in interviews and what his chief of staff says, and you know, so all those things have played a role. But it's just a little bit strange how there are always, you know, they keep changing the travel ban every 90 days or so. You know, there are changes, and then there are big battles, and then they issue a new one, and all of these things have they're very tied up with the media and keeping the public engaged, and they seem to come at times that you know, there's a need to distract the public and keep people busy. And so, yeah, it does seem to have a big media presence, and that's kind of been a big part of the whole legal issue as well.
I'll just talk about the perspective from, I guess, from Department of Homeland Security bureaucrats, like my former self and my friends, my colleagues in the past. There's a listserv that I'm a part of, and I keep in contact with my friends who are still working in the agency, and the confusion that exists in the public as to what's it going to be like going forward exists pretty much in the same way among the refugee officers. And these are the people who are sent abroad to do the vetting, and now it's extreme vetting. That was my job, and that's what people right now are doing in Iraq and in Jordan. They're sitting down with people who have applied to be resettled to the United States, and they're interviewing them and doing the vetting that they're required to do. And the confusion exists there as well. People who are there, they're not getting guidance as to, well, what are we supposed to be doing differently when we sit down with an Iraqi family and a Syrian family? How are we supposed to be interviewing them differently? And the opposition is there as well. With the second travel ban, the Union of Refugee Officers, we had a union. We filed an amicus brief to the U.S. Supreme Court. So we filed a brief to the U.S. Supreme Court saying essentially, like, this executive order is unworkable. It doesn't provide us any guidance. We just want to do our job. I personally really enjoyed interviewing and sitting down and talking with refugee families who were coming to the United States, and one of the things that Trump has been talking about publicly, especially in the past few months, has been extreme vetting as opposed to whatever vetting was going on beforehand. No one really knows what that means. People still don't know what that means. People within the Department of Homeland Security are still trying to figure out what that means. There's some hints that it may involve Facebook, like literally just asking refugees to provide their logins, perhaps, and looking through their messages as if this is going to enhance US national security. And I think this is in response to the San Bernardino attacks, because I think there were reports that the husband and wife who carried it out were like communicating on Facebook through Facebook messages, and as if, and it's just it's security theater to cite this as an example of extreme vetting. You're not going to have a Department of Homeland Security officer going through the Facebook accounts of every refugee, and analyzing each message, each like. So just the act of clicking a thumbs up, that could be analyzed, and that could be grounds for rejecting someone's refugee application. It's just completely untenable, and yet this is what the Trump administration is sort of implementing as their extreme vetting. I haven't heard anything other than this specific, enhanced vetting.
Can you tell everyone what the vetting process is currently?
Sure. I think Mushtaq, you can probably talk to this too.
Sure, I can do that. My immigration application lasted for 3 years and a half, and that's still short time for many refugees. I applied in August 2013, and then I had to reapply again because my application was denied. And then I had to provide more and more documents, and actually, when I reapplied in September 2014, I had to get the Chief of Mission approval first, and that was in December of the same year. Then my application was sent to the USCIS in Nebraska, and it took them 7 months. And after that, I was scheduled for an appointment at the embassy, which was in November 15. My wife was interviewed in February 16, and then our visas were issued in November 16, but to our surprise, it turned out there was a mistake in my visa, and then we had to resend the passports to the embassy, and they said that they were going to correct them as soon as possible. Fortunately, it took 4 months for the visas to be reissued, and that was actually a lot of stress for me, because I had left my job at the time. I had to stay without a job for the whole month and dealing with so much stress with the uncertainty surrounding the case. So it was a long process. Actually, I know a friend who has an application, has been applied for 5 years, and still it is not guaranteed that he will be able to come here. And he is from the Christian minority in northern Iraq, and he was the first people who rushed to work for the U.S. military when it arrived in Iraq in 2003, and spent more than 3 years working for the U.S. military. And I know very sure that this person cannot pose a threat to the U.S. national security. For some reason, his application has been prolonged over and over, and he still doesn't know what to do about it. So with regard to people's perceptions here, since arriving in Missoula, I've talked to people about the travel ban. A lot of people were saying that this does not represent the U.S. values. So they said that we welcome refugees from anywhere. We think that this is not fair. And actually, you may have seen on the news that there were many protests across U.S. airports when the travel ban went into effect, to protest the travel ban and to express to new arrivals that the United States welcomes refugees. Actually, it was kind of relieving for the people who were coming here, and people perceived it as a more noble standing than many of the governments in the Middle East region, that they never made any complaint to the US government after the travel ban. The other thing is that I'd like to mention is that the United States, this is just my own opinion, the United States government could probably spend on programs of social and community engagement for refugees, so that after they arrive in the US, they do not remain isolated in communities. This can be like can instigate in sometimes sort of extremism that can lead people, to commit attacks or things like that. The more refugees are engaged in the community, the less likely they are going to, to think about, taking revenge or things like that against people here in the community. So I guess the United States government probably would be better to spend on those programs than creating a list of countries, because there are already big foreign communities in the US. And these communities can probably, create the problems in the future if they remain isolated. And I've heard about a lot of them in other states, not in Montana actually. So this is just my opinion.
How, and this is my last question, then I want to open it up. How can we create a more inclusive environment in Missoula and Montana in the U.S.?
Honestly, volunteer with Soft Landing Missoula. We're really, really lucky here in Missoula to have the IRC and Soft Landing Missoula, 2 organizations that help refugees acclimate to life here in Montana. We're the only entrance point for refugees in Montana. And we're lucky to have those organizations, and it's huge. I mean, talking about the Muslim ban, all these things happening in district courts, circuit courts, the Supreme Court, it feels like it's out of your hands. It's totally not. And it means so much to be able to it means it's so effective when people on the ground are able to just meet people at the airport, help newly arrived refugees enroll their children in schools, help them navigate the healthcare system, help them find work, help them drive them to appointments and things like that. Help them teach them basic English. These sorts of things, they seem small, they seem insignificant, but they are not. These are crucial. I think maybe a year and a half ago, if we were having this conversation, we'd be talking about this stupid protest that took place in front of the courthouse with all these people who said, oh, these refugees are going to institute Sharia law and all of this stuff. I don't know if you've noticed, but all of these groups, they've gone silent. All of the, well, yeah, I mean, they've pretty much gone silent. All of the opposition to refugees here in Montana, it's pretty much just faded away, because what happened was people here in Missoula decided, you know, let's help out. Let's greet these people at the airport. Let's help them begin their new lives here in Montana. And now you go to the farmer's market. You know, who's selling bread in the farmer's market? There's an Iraqi family. Like, who's working in Target and Walmart and like the late night shifts? It's that no one else really wants to work for. Like, it's refugees who are becoming integrated in our community. It's the folks who were being accused of being horrible things, you know, a year and a half ago, and they really disproved all of the bigoted naysayers, and that process is happening all across the United States. I mean, a lot of it we have to thank for Mary Poole. I know, but like, she was huge. She was huge, and so I think, to answer the question, like, what can I do? It really is get involved at the local level. Obviously, you want to contact your senators and your congressmen, because they do have the, you know, ability to influence policy. But really, on the ground interaction with refugees, helping them, preventing this isolation that naturally occurs, and it's terrible. It's really, really, really hard to be resettled in the United States, especially relative to some other European countries that spend a lot of money on classes to help people integrate. You know, there's no pressure if you're resettled in Sweden to get a job within a couple of months, because they'll give you a year's worth of unemployment, they'll give you English classes, they'll enroll you in college and everything. You don't have to pay a dime. That doesn't exist here in the United States. It's a lot more bare bones, and so you have nonprofit organizations sort of filling in the void, and people, just everyday people on the ground getting involved. That is crucial.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think what'll make refugees feel more included is if inclusive, or as if there are more refugees. You know, so bringing more refugees in is, I think, one of the solutions to that same problem. I mean, Montana is a big state, and the population, the numbers of non-citizens or people from other countries are low, and it's hard for people to form communities in Montana. And I've noticed that through my work with the Latino communities throughout Montana. Everybody feels a little bit isolated, and they need like a way to, you know, to form a community, and you can only form a community when you have more of you. And so it's just, you know, I think that's just one of the basic things that needs to happen in Montana, is there just needs to be a few more immigrants brought into this state. And I think Soft Landing is doing that by helping bring in more refugees, and IRC, Jen Burley, everybody. Yeah, so that's really good work. And you know, yeah, I think everybody always asks the question of like, why are there, you know, why are there people the more rural the community, the more anti-immigrant it seems to be sometimes, and why that is. And so my assessment on that I always kind of come up with is just that it seems like it's a self-perpetuating problem where you don't have a lot of exposure to people from other countries or other diverse backgrounds, and so then you kind of form beliefs about it based on fear and your own insecurities, and then when there's nobody around to change that view, it just continues. And so there are a lot of places in Montana that are actually pretty openly hostile to refugees, and that's just a fact. And there are legislators, Montana legislators, that proposed bills last legislative session to try to make it harder for refugees to come in to Montana. And so there are people who don't want refugees in Montana, and they're being kind of loud about it in certain ways. But it's been great to see that that hasn't slowed anyone down, and I think Missoula is a great place. It's been kind of heartening to see all the news articles coming out about everybody welcoming the refugees to Missoula, and so I think that's great news.
So I've been following the news for a long time, not just in the United States, also in Europe. Most of the terrorist attacks in Europe came from individuals living in communities that were described as isolated, which means that they were not engaged in the community. So those communities or isolated communities provided golden opportunity for extremists to spread their negative thoughts and recruit people to implement hate or terror attacks against the local community. The more engaged people of the community are, refugees are in the local community, the less likely they will do that. Actually, it's just like a fact that probably neglected by many when they think about this. And I think that's it.
Any comments, questions, thoughts? Go ahead.
I had a question about when you're talking about the various judges who block things, saying that there's clearly some kind of animus against certain classes of people, which is the reason behind these bans that being blocked. Why is it, and I'm asking you to speculate here, that like a large majority of Muslim country like Indonesia isn't on the list? And you know what I mean? Like there's an inconsistency there. And then the panelist from Iraq was talking about how Christians from that country are kind of getting the same beat. Is this an anti-animus, or is it, you know what I'm saying? Or is it that the supporters of the administration who are prejudiced can't imagine an Asian Muslim?
Let's see. Well, so from a legal standpoint, they have always had some difficulty identifying why the countries they chose were on the list, because what they're supposed to be able to show is that there are more terror attacks occurring inside the United States by people from that country. And they can't really show that because there haven't been very many terror attacks inside the United States. And you can't tie those to the 7 countries they chose initially. And so that was already a problem. For the second one, they got a little more tricky. For the second executive order, they actually said that they were going to commission this study, and then they were going to come up with recommendations, and then they were going to, choose based on those recommendations. And then I don't remember if this was part of the second or the third, but finally they came up with this process to analyze every country's national security risks based on a bunch of criteria, and every country had to respond to some kind of survey or information request, and then they would compile the information. And then miraculously, it mostly came out to be the same countries they chose the first time, but with a couple of additions like North Korea and Venezuela. So after this whole entire study, they got right back to the same spot they were for the most part, and they just took Iraq off the list for their own reasons. And so, the courts have been really skeptical about that, and they've made it really clear in their decisions that they don't buy it. And they, all the decisions that have come out have gone through the whole facts, and they're like, this is now the third one. We haven't forgotten that you said this about the first and second, so we still remember that, and we're still skeptical, So yeah, it seems pretty likely that that at least the most recent, the TRO of the most recent travel ban it should hopefully be affirmed as well. One would hope, and then who knows what the next one would be like. So,
I'm a little hesitant. I think when if this gets to the U.S. Supreme Court, I think there's a good chance the U.S. Supreme Court will uphold the most recent executive order, sort of just based on the composition of the U.S. Supreme Court, because there is this principle in U.S. immigration law that the president can decide however he wants, like who can come into the country. He has complete, it's called plenary power. He has almost unlimited power to decide, he or she has unlimited power to decide who can come into this country. And the lower courts have been very good at putting limits on that, but I sort of have fear that if this actually makes it up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and I think it probably will, that the U.S. Supreme Court, at least 5 justices will say, this is okay because the president can do this, and we don't want to, they'll probably decide, we don't want to hinder his ability to defend our national security based on like the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution or the Establishment Clause of the Constitution. I don't know, that's my fear. They gave indication that they were going to do that with the second executive order, and my sense is that they'll follow through with that on the third executive order if it gets in front of them. Another thing to remember is that the first and second executive orders were just 6 months long. They only applied for 6 months, but the most recent one, the third one, it's essentially permanent. It's supposed to go under review every 6 months, but I don't know, do you really trust the Trump administration to review their executive order every 6 months?
I have a question for the first 2 panelists. It seems as though you two have a conflict here, and I'd like for you guys to kind of explain it a little bit more. On the one hand, your thought is that there's a lot of people from a certain community who come here who are isolated and through comfort seek to be with people who know their history and kind of gather together. That can create extremism through that community. Whereas I think Shahid, is it? You were saying that we need more people to come in. So I'm trying to figure out if you two are in agreement, or if there's a way that more people can come in, but can also be accepted into the community, so this isolation that you're referring to kind of in some Midwestern states doesn't happen.
yeah, so when I'm saying that, we want to create a community that people can, a community of Latinos, for instance, like where they can get together as a community, I don't really mean that they get together as an only Latino community and they don't hang out with white people. So like I was imagining, what we do is we have like little dances. We organize community events that bring them together as a group, but just sometimes. They still hang out with everybody else the rest of the time. And so, but what it does is when they hang out as a community, it actually will, it improves their depression, their high rates of depression amongst people who, who don't have a sense of community, and they have something they can bond together over and their common background and language. So it's healthy for them to have those types of connections in addition to engaging with the broader community and with everybody else. But it's definitely important, I think, in and of itself also. So it's kind of, you don't want isolation a way where it's forced isolation. Like you don't want to be isolated due to economic status or isolated because nobody wants you around, which I think is what he was saying. It was like when you're being isolated because the community rejects you, then you're going to form all these negative opinions, and that's negative. But if you're, but yeah, isolation is not good. I think that the community is more about like engaging, So.
And that's what the resettlement agencies have been trying to do, is that to get the refugees more engaged in the community so that they become part of the community, not just that they are being brought and put in the US and without any more assistance. So that's probably better not to bring them than bringing them here and just leaving them like that to establish their own communities, because they may develop negative opinions actually about the US in general. Yeah.
So when Donald Trump gets impeached and Mike Pence becomes president, it's inevitable. What happens then? Will he have the power to influence the Supreme Court now?
I think he would probably just keep doing the same thing Donald Trump is doing with their strategy of, I mean, their strategy is essentially to continue to implement executive orders that marginally change things to comply with the last court order. So if the last court order had certain criticisms, they might alter things a little bit more. But I don't. It's hard to tell. You know what they're going to do. It really is impossible to predict.
Talking about vetting versus extreme vetting, Danny, in your experience as an officer that did the vetting, Mushtaq, is your experience as someone who's been through the vetting and also worked for our government in a way to help protect us from the very things that we fear. Do you, short of Facebook searching, we all want to be safe. Are there things that you feel like in the vetting process could be better? Are there things that you feel like realistically other steps that could be taken? Or do you feel confident that the questions you got asked, Mushtaq, if someone that you didn't want in this country for your own safety wouldn't make it through, or whatever? Can you speak to that a little bit? Is there wiggle room for improvement, or is it really a great system? I mean, I think it speaks for itself, personally. I know my opinion on this, but I'm not as educated in it as you are.
So I think one really good point, that Mushtaq brought up was that it took 3.5 years for him to get to the United States, from sending in the application to arriving here by plane. It's just not a tenable way to infiltrate the United States with terrorist operatives, to engage in a 3.5-year-long process. It's not like ISIS is sitting down with a few people and being like, okay, so you're gonna file an application with the United Nations as a refugee, and you're gonna wait maybe like a year in a refugee camp, and maybe they'll say that you're a refugee, maybe they won't. And then once they declare you as a refugee, fingers crossed, then you'll wait another few months, maybe a year, and then you'll have another interview where they'll decide whether you're one of the 1% of refugees who are actually eligible for resettlement in a third country. And by a third country, I mean not the country where you're from, and not the country where you've sought asylum, brief asylum, a third country like the United States or Sweden. Only 1% of refugees even have that opportunity to apply. So let's say you make it through probably 2 years and you get to UN approval for a third country resettlement. And you're an ISIS operative and you want to, plan a terrorist attack. There is a chance that you'll end up in the United States, but there's also a chance that you'll have an interview with Australia, or Japan, or Sweden, or one of the many other countries that does third country resettlement. So maybe you were plotting on, blowing up something in New York City, but then you get sent to Denmark or something, or Australia, or Japan. Plans foiled. But even, let's say, the US does resettle more refugees than all of the other countries combined. So your chances are that you will be resettled in the United States. So you wait maybe another year. again, living in a refugee camp, getting your food from the UN, going to poor quality UN schools if you have any children, not working, just sort of sitting underneath a tarp, maybe, or in a really shoddy apartment, waiting for that US interview with a DHS officer like myself. You have a few more interviews where they collect your story and they write it down in a Word document, or they record your story as to why you fled and what happened to you in Iraq or in Syria. And then, you know, maybe 2 years, 3 years into the process, you sit down with me, and then I look through all of your previous interviews, and I look for discrepancies, I look for indications that you may have participated in persecution, indications that you may have been involved in terrorist activity. They run your name and their biographic data through a bunch of security databases run by all of those 3-letter agencies, and if anything comes up inconclusive, then your application is thrown out. And so you're relying on getting through that process, and even after you're approved by the DHS representative, you've got to get medical clearance, and you have to go through cultural orientation, and so it's just not a tenable way to attack the United States. I don't want to give ISIS any advice here today, but if you're planning on attacking the United States, the US Refugee Admissions Program is not the way you should do it. It's not effective. That being said, the vetting process is not just because of the immense amount of bureaucracy, it's also really comprehensive. As a refugee officer, we had access to the whole Iraqi criminal database. If you were convicted of, you know, writing a bad check in 1980 in Baghdad, we knew. If you were, and then they run if your fingerprints were found on shrapnel from a roadside bomb they would have that, and it would be in the database, and we'd run your fingerprints, and we would know, and you obviously wouldn't be admitted to the United States. It's incredibly comprehensive, and it's more comprehensive than any other visa, any other route to getting to the United States through the immigration process. It's grueling, it's absolutely grueling, it's demeaning, and it's demeaning. I had to ask 13-year-old girls, like in front of their parents, like, are you a prostitute? Do you intend to engage in prostitution? This seems silly here in the US, but it's like offensive to ask these questions in the Middle East. And that's just the start of it. I mean, asking, there's just a bunch of really probing questions. I don't know, what was it like to go through?
I think it is already extreme too, because the amount of, or the stages that the application has to go through is just like overwhelming. And I guess a lot of it has to do with the bureaucracy too, because the application has to be processed first at the US Embassy, then brought to the USCIS, and then sent back to the embassy, and that takes a lot of time. And a lot of people's lives are in danger that may not, it may be too long for them to wait in order to be able to get out of that country safely. So I guess, talking about the US Embassy in Iraq, I think they probably just didn't have enough staff to process all the applications they had, because they had tons of applications for people who assisted the military. And for a single spelling mistake, it took them 3 months to correct it. And you can see that, how shortage of staff they are. So I think it's already extreme, but just needs to be probably some improvements or restructuring in order to make it faster. And that's it.
Yeah, before maybe a couple of years ago, the conversation was, how can we make this process faster? How can we have less, I don't want to say less vetting, but less ridiculous bureaucracy that slows down the process? Because people were dying. I would have cases sitting on my desk in the morning, and then you look through them, and then you would get notification, oh, that person was actually assassinated because someone found out that they had worked for the United States, or someone, it's not even if you work directly for the United States, someone found out that your brother-in-law worked for the United States. That taints the whole family name. You're considered to be allied with the United States if someone in your family is. It brings great shame upon the family in certain neighborhoods and among certain demographics, and people would die. People would die of just lack of access to good quality medical care. And that was the conversation up until about 2014, 2015, and then suddenly we're in this universe where we're wondering if there's any way we can implement even more extreme vetting, and it just seems, and this is from the perspective of really all people, all refugee officers, it just seems ridiculous. Like, what more could we do? Yes.
So, I mean, I think everyone in this room has compassion, care, concern for the refugee situation, which is absolutely extreme throughout the world right now. I mean, there's an exodus of people searching for comfort, more so than any other time after World War II now in history. But I think it's a community's responsibility in a certain sort, like Soft Landing. Again, Soft Landing wants to comfort people in need, and I think we all want to do that, but doesn't a community have a responsibility about, you're talking about cultural inclusiveness. How much inclusiveness can we really offer in a town like Missoula, Montana, which is the most liberal, compassionate city throughout the entire state? They send homeless people from Bozeman and Billings to our community because we care and they don't. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, should we have more focus of assimilating these refugees into communities that have already a place for a cultural interaction that is already established in bigger cities like, say, Portland or New York or LA. Missoula, we can't even deal with our Native American populace here. There's so much bias. So when we talk about bringing people from Syria and Iran and Iraq and assimilating them into our culture in a town like Missoula, that we all want to do, but there's no culture here for them. And housing costs here is just outrageous. So I wonder if our effort should be trying to utilize the little communities like Missoula, the smaller places, in finding networks in larger communities that they'll have more of a cultural interaction available to them, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel in a small community like Missoula.
Well, I would say that every single concern you raise could be addressed in a better way than to reject a refugee who needs a place to stay. I mean, the fact is that, yeah, there are issues that could be dealt with, but you make them sound insurmountable and like it's just something that couldn't be done. It's so difficult. I can't figure out the answer. So the answer is deny a refugee admission.
I mean, any premise didn't say about denial of people. I want their welcome here, but I feel there's an assimilation process that's more available in other communities where there's a cultural community there for them to network with.
I just think the evidence. Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I think the evidence speaks for itself. Look at the families who have been resettled in Missoula thus far. Talk with them, ask them how it's been, ask them what problems they've had. I don't think any group of immigrants to the United States have ever had like a seamless transition to living here. There's always going to be problems, always going to be problems. People complain about the housing costs in Missoula. Try being resettled to New York City. And people are. And it's incredibly hard. I think Missoula is a perfectly fine place. There's communities in Idaho Falls, there's communities in Pocatello, I think the folks who have been resettled here have had, I don't want to smooth over their concerns and make it seem like they've had an easy time. It's not. Resettling in a third country, always going to be incredibly difficult. And I think once you start looking at individual cities and saying, well, this is a good place, this is not a good place, I don't think that's a good road to go down, because I think in every city, every town, doesn't matter if it's a rural area or an urban area, you're going to have people who are going to say, well, why are we helping out these people when we've got homeless people on the streets? There's homeless people on the streets in every single city in the United States. You can make that argument in New York City, you can make it in Dallas, you can make it in Idaho Falls, you can make it everywhere. And I think as long as there's jobs for people to work in, to work, and that exists here in Missoula, and as long as there's places for people to live, you know, if you go to the lower income areas of Missoula, there's affordable housing, somewhat affordable housing. It's a little bit harder to find, but it's a lot easier to find a place to live here than it is in, say, like New York City.
Sure.
And I'm not saying it's easy, it's difficult, but it's no more difficult than it is in any other place where refugees are commonly resettled. That's not just including the United States. The same problems exist in Sweden, in Canada, Australia.
I think following on what you said, I heard from other refugees that they have relatives in other states and that they could go there and get better jobs that can improve their economic situation. But they said they would never go because they said we have never found, or we don't think that we will ever find like a welcoming community like Missoula's.
So my question, I want to suggest that a lot of the 9/11 attackers were on F1 visas, student visas. So I would like someone to contrast the vetting process that students go through as opposed to the vetting process that refugees go through.
As far as I know, for the student visa process, you would first apply for admission to a university and then go through the foreign student advisor there. And then they would issue this document called the I-20 that's like issued from this computer system. And then at that point, you would get set up for an interview at the U.S. consulate in whatever country you live in, and you'll have this interview. And I think they mainly just want to confirm that you actually have the qualifications to be a student and that you have the money to pay for tuition and stuff like that. But also by that point, they will have at least taken, they'll do your biometrics, and they will have collected biographical information from you on this computerized application form. So it's like they'll have your addresses since you were age 14. They'll have your employment since you I think it asks for pretty much all of your employment. And then, a whole bunch of things, including your parents' names, your brothers and sisters and everything. And so all that information, I think, gets still screened. I don't know if it's the same computer system they use for refugees or not, honestly, but it's at least screened, and then you have an interview, and if all looks good, you'll be issued the student visa, and the process it can take a few months. So.
Can I just make a comment real quick?
Sure.
Yeah, I think the Indian nations in the United States have assisted the white Europeans to assimilate because they're the original people here. They are the indigenous people here in our United States, and I think they've done a pretty good job of accepting us as much as they could by having so many treaties broken and lies told and death and genocide of the Native American tribes. They've survived and they've thrived, especially here at Flathead, especially with the casinos. Hello, they're doing great, okay? So we're not looking at Native Americans, we're not looking at them as the other. They're the original, and they're doing great. And who's not doing great are the white European privileged, usually men, but women too, who have an attitude for some reason that the United States belongs to the European culture that tried to destroy the indigenous people that belong here. So I'm always astounded when I hear someone marginalizing the Native Americans, and I know it wasn't meant as a diss. I know that most people really honestly believe that there was some kind of, what do they call it, God-given, what is the God-given right to take over a country, conquest, and, blah, blah, blah. And that's still the attitude of most people who live in the United States. Unfortunately, I believe they honestly think that somehow they have a right to break treaties and destroy people and try to kill them off and take their land and destroy their buffalo and everything else. Sorry I've gone on long, but this is a huge issue. And look who we're talking in front of. Where are we right now in this space with that bison on the wall? And yeah, so.
Those are big issues. I think they're big issues, bigger than what we can address here today.
Gotcha.
But I want to just get back to Moses's question about the difference between the process of coming to the U.S. as a student and coming to as a refugee. I think we've already sort of made it clear, but the process of coming as a refugee is significantly more rigorous and less seamless and lengthy than the process of coming in as a student. And I think the big difference that I would point out is that when I sat down to interview a refugee, I had the notes of the interviews, of all previous interviews that they had with UN officials, and then there's an intermediate step with an international organization called the International Organization of Migration. So we had 2 extensive interviews already done with people who are coming to the US as refugees, and then we would interview them again. If there are significant, if there are even small discrepancies between the stories that they gave maybe a year ago or 2 years ago to these other officials, maybe there were translation issues, we're frequently doing these interviews with an interpreter, that is frequently the grounds for just denying someone's application. I'd say the vast majority of refugees who are rejected for resettlement in the United States are because they gave insufficient details as to their military history, or there was a small discrepancy between their story and the story that their brother gave about this time in 2006 when Al-Qaeda came to their house and left a threatening note on their front stoop. This is a little anecdote. There was an officer who rejected a refugee application. This is an Iraqi family, a Christian Iraqi family that ran a liquor store in Baghdad, and they rejected this application because one brother specified that when Jaish al-Mahdi, which is a sort of a Shia gang, came into their Shia militia, they came into their liquor store and they shot it up. And one brother described that the mirror behind the bar shattered, and this officer asked the other brother, well, did the mirror shatter when Jaish al-Mahdi came into your liquor store? And that brother said, no, I don't think so. Or he said no. And that was the basis for denying both of their applications. Keep in mind that this incident occurred maybe 5 years before the interview, and so they're trying to remember the details of this one incident, and it's a very traumatic incident, and I don't know if people remember things really differently. Human memory is incredibly flawed, and yet these are the kinds of decisions that are keeping people out of the United States and leading to people's deaths because they have nowhere else to go. So they'll remain in Iraq until someone assassinates them, or maybe they'll make an attempt to cross the Mediterranean Sea by paying a bunch of smugglers a few $1,000s, and then, oh, the boat sinks. That's just the reality of the situation. The folks who are showing up in Greece and Italy on these shoddy boats crossing the ocean, these are frequently the people who were rejected from at some point along the pipeline of applying to resettlement in a third country.
See, I would like to know that the reason that the United States has listed those countries in the travel ban is that because most of those countries have internal sectarian and civil wars. And so they think that because they have wars and there has been a lot of violence, that people of these countries are hard to vet and hard to trust, and that's why they have listed them in the travel ban. See, the problem is that there are many ethnic and religious minorities in those countries, and they will be included in the ban too. And they have nothing to do with those conflicts that have been going on for a long time. In fact, they have paid a heavy price for these conflicts. But at the same time, they are being denied entry to the United States just because they happen to exist in that country that is on the list. For example, like Syria, maybe Libya, Sudan, even Yemen, other countries. And the other thing that you mentioned with regard to like how the vetting process and how people, how people get vets just because like of someone's decision that a whole family gets denied. I guess that these people have nothing to do with all the conflict, and it's just like can be the decision of someone who's just doing the interview, and and they lose their chances of coming to the U.S. A lot of people in the Middle East perceive that the U.S. that has a responsibility for some of the major conflicts in the region, like the Syrian war, the war in Iraq, the war in Libya, and in Yemen. And yet, the United States, the number of refugees the United States has received from those countries is like a tiny portion to the huge number of refugees that have been received, for example, by Germany. Germany took more than 1 million refugees back in 2015, whereas the United States only took probably less than 100,000.
Oh, no.
Okay. We're gonna go ahead and wrap up, but I want to end on this note. We have Jen from the IRC here, and Mary was here. I think she might have left, but if you are wanting to get more engaged in the Missoula community, if you want to meet the refugees that have been resettled here, reach out to the IRC, reach out to Soft Landing. There are some wonderful people in Missoula, wonderful resettled refugees in Missoula. If you take the time to get to know them and include them in, in your everyday lives. As it was brought up, isolation is a huge issue for resettled refugees. Let's do something about that as a community. I want to thank our panel and thank you all for coming out. And on behalf of Humanities Montana, thank you for engaging in your community.
Thanks. Thanks for having us.